Hi again, everyone. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, in the peasant revolt, um, the people of Germany, of what now is modern Germany, um, or certainly what was then many of the territories of the Holy Roman Empire um, in that region, as a result of the Protestant Reformation, really revolted against the hierarchy. It was in part a religious revolt led by some of the religious leaders of the Reformation, um, but Martin Luther, in order to, I guess, good or bad, not make the Reformation become something completely chaotic, he sided with the the leaders of the hierarchy, and and really publicly denounced the peasant revolt. It led to the slaughter of perhaps as many as 100,000 peasants. It was not the best defining moment of the Reformation. Um, and neither was, in a way, really the beginning of the what is called the Anglican Church. We call it the Episcopalian Church in this country, really for political reasons dating back to the colonial era. But the Anglican Church started with Henry VIII, the King of England, um, who separated from the Roman Catholic Church simply because he wanted to marry another wife. I think I don't know how many different women he divorced and remarried, quite a number. And the Catholic Church said no. He said yes, and he broke off from the Roman Catholic Church, beginning the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. It wasn't the best reason for starting a new church. However, interestingly enough, the Anglican Church globally today does reflect a significant portion of what we would call renewal Christianity today, especially the Anglican Church in Africa and in many parts of Asia. It is the third largest denomination, Christian denomination in the world, numerically speaking, and very influential in many parts of the world. Um, let's look at a few of the movements and denominations that developed out of the Reformation. You have Lutheranism, that certainly was started by its founder, Martin Luther, and became very strong in Germany, in what is now Germany and German lands, but other parts of Europe as well. Anglicanism, which was certainly started by the Church of England and really spread, especially as England became more influential globally in what was later British territories in different parts of the world. Um, but then uh, you also had other groups really started out of what I call the radical, or what not just me, what many call the radical Reformation. There were actually several different reformations that occurred. You have the main Protestant Reformation that occurred um, with Martin Luther posting the 95 Theses in Wittenberg, Germany. But then shortly after that, there were other groups that emerged and suggested that Martin Luther hadn't gone far enough in changing the church. These groups were called the Radical Reformers. And so this branch of the Reformation was called the Radical Reformation. They included Anabaptists that largely disagreed with the concept of infant baptism and suggested that really only somebody who's an adult can make a conscious decision to receive Christ and become baptized. And but they represented various different groups: the Swiss Brethren, the Amish, Mennonites, and General Baptists. That was the beginning of Baptists as well. But uh, there were other groups that came out of the radical Reformation, rationalists and mystics as well. And there were some groups that came later, certainly Quakers and others that really emerged out of much of that tradition. But a lot of them really felt that in particular, uh, some of their concepts that were revolutionary, which are really reflected in our own government, were the idea that religion and state should be in a sense uh, separated, because what emerged initially from the Reformation were basically different nation states declared their own faith. They were, they a Lutheran nation, a Anglican nation like the Church of England, or were they, the French decided to remain Roman Catholic, but ultimately, these radical reformers said the state should not control religion, in essence, and that was a pretty revolutionary idea at the time, but it certainly was reflected in the formation of the United States. Um, you also had Reformed Christian groups. We've talked about them, the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists. The Congregationalists really were the group that began Puritanism in the United States, which was very influential in the very beginning of the United States. And then, of course, you had a group really opposed to what we call this Reformed Christianity, uh, the Arminianists. Their influence was reflected largely upon Methodism, which shortly after we became a nation, the Methodist Church was very effective in evangelism and became the largest Christian denomination in the United States for the next century. And so, a little bit more about the radical Reformation. I encourage you to read the articles in Stan Burgess's book on Thomas Müntzer and Menno Simmons. But briefly, Thomas Müntzer was a very prophetic individual. He had a strong emphasis on the spiritual gifts and direct revelation from the Holy Spirit. Um, anyway, very important for, really, in a way, when you look at Christianity from a renewal perspective, the radical reformers were really the ones that brought about the spiritual renewal in the midst of the Reformation at that time. However, they had their challenges. Thomas Müntzer, you could almost say he was a more modern version of Montanus in his use and abuse of the gift of prophecy. But you can read more about him. I encourage you to do that. Menno Simmons, however, um, developed much more nuanced approach to renewal Christianity. He believed in the presence and the baptism of the Holy Spirit, but he believed that the Holy Spirit expressed his divine will through the consensus of community, which was and is, and often I've found it to be a very healthy expression of renewal Christianity in churches where even Paul himself says that the community of believers should judge prophecy and discern if spiritual gifts, in essence, according to the way Paul writes it, should be discerned or within the community of believers. And Menno Simmons emphasized that, as a way to help balance the uh, how do I say it, the heretical edges of renewal Christianity at the time. And I think it was a healthy balance and something we can still learn from today, especially for those of us in renewal Christianity. Um, here's a question. What do you think are the pros and cons of so many new movements and denominations? This began to fragment Christianity at the time. But when you think about global Christianity today, there's 35, 40 over 40,000 different Christian denominations in the world today. Is that healthy? Is that good? Um, do you agree or disagree with a Calvinist or Arminian approach to Christianity? And finally, can you recognize these movements in your own tradition. We're out of time. We're going to have to go to a third section.